I'm going to start recording. Hope everyone's doing great on this sunny Thursday. And I will just try not to royally mess this up. So I am happy that everyone was able to join me today. We're going to make some challah dough today, and then we will bake it tomorrow. This is for a few reasons. First of all, it just makes more sense with the timing. Bread takes a while. I don't think even like Idris Elba could hold an audience for 6 to 8 hours, so I'm not going to attempt that at all. But it also helps with the dough itself. So when it comes out of the fridge, it'll be a lot easier for us to handle when we're shaping those braids. And it also slows down the fermentation process, which is going to do a couple of things. That is going to, increase the amount of time that your dough lasts. There are natural kind of preservative properties that come as a result of the acidity produced by the bacteria that naturally occur in the dough. And that's also going to improve the flavor. It's going to make it a little more dynamic, a little less one note. So it's all around like a great way to do it. Plus, you know, you can squeeze it in on your lunch break and then throw it in the fridge, come back to it when you're ready. You have a little more time. So yeah, there are a lot of benefits to doing it that way. If you haven't already gathered all of your ingredients, please do that while I'm kind of going over this part. The recipe can be found on the group page. I posted it. It's the challah dough, but just in case, I'll pull it up right here. And you can see it's a pretty straightforward, simple recipe. If you wanted a baking kit and you weren't able to pick one up yet, please get in touch with me over Facebook Messenger, or if you have my cell phone number, you can use that. I have an alternative number too that I can publicly post to the page, so people can text me that way, and I will make a note to do that after this broadcast. And then please just let me know also if you want some levain or sourdough starter. I'm going to be following up posting a video on how to feed that. So if you've already picked it up and you're not sure what to do, don't worry. I will be posting that as well. And then if you weren't able, or if someone you know wasn't able to make this broadcast, we will go ahead and I'll post it to Facebook. Hopefully I can figure out how to do that so that it stays up for longer than 24 hours. But I'm also going to try and get a YouTube set up so that people can just go reference it at their leisure. I'm new to this. I am not tech savvy at all, as anyone who knows me well will attest to. It's been tricky figuring all of this stuff out, but I'm excited to be doing it, and I hope that it's helpful and fun and is a good way for us to do something that feels kind of productive and definitely delicious given the weird climate that we're all in. So yeah, hopefully you've been able to gather all of your ingredients, and I'll go ahead and dive in. I'm going to cut down to a different angle here. So if you don't have a kitchen scale, I would really recommend getting one if you want to do even like a fair amount of baking at home. It's a lot more accurate, and especially if you're working with yeasted products, the leavening and everything is a lot more accurate, and you're just going to yield better results if you are weighing things out. I will continue to include volumetric measurements in all of the recipes that I post just to make it easy for people, but the scale was about 50 bucks. I got it on Amazon. You can find them for $10 or $15 pretty easily at Target. I think some grocery stores even carry them. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. One thing I like about this one is that if I have a big bowl on it, that can make it really hard to read this panel. but this pulls out, which is quite handy. Um, and it does metric and US measurements. So something to consider. Other tools that I recommend if you want to do anything involving dough is a bench scraper like this. And this is nice for dividing your doughs and also for the cleanup afterwards. You can scrape up all that loose flour and just dump it into your compost, and then come back and hit it with a wet rag. And then a bowl scraper, which is generally a little more flexible. It'll be tapered to the shape of a bowl, so you can really get in there and scrape all that stuff out. You can use a rubber spatula as well. These are just a little stiffer, so it's easier to get sticky doughs out. These can be found at restaurant supply stores. You can find them online, although I know deliveries are a little tricky right now. And I've seen them also at like cash and carry. You might be able to find them at Costco. So maybe keep an eye out the next time you're out shopping. All right, so basics for bread doughs. Generally speaking, I like to add all of my liquid ingredients first, and that typically includes eggs. And then I'm going to add my dry ingredients in on top of that. So I've gone ahead and done some mise en place, which just means everything in its place. I've already measured out my eggs. I've got my water here. I have some orange zest because I think that will be delicious in this dough. You can add any kind of citrus zest that you want. This is just the zest of one orange. You can add cardamom or cinnamon or whatever your favorite kind of spice is. You could do fennel or coriander if you want to go more savory. There are lots of different options there. So just to your taste. If you're using a stronger spice, I would recommend keeping it at a teaspoon or less. It will intensify in the baking process. So just be careful with how much you add. And I've also got my oil over here. So I've got 2 egg yolks and 1 egg in here. And I'm just going to go ahead and dump that in. And I saved my egg whites, and I would recommend that you save your egg whites as well. First of all, we're going to be doing a coconut macaroon recipe tomorrow, which will use those egg whites, but you can make a lot of different products with them. You can make souffles, you can use them to leaven waffles, make those nice and fluffy. You can also make buttercream, traditional European style buttercream, which is a lot more delicate, melt in the mouth, has a much nicer texture. And that's something that we can do here in the future too. So then I'm just going to add my liquids in. I've got my oil and my water. Again, this recipe is posted on the forum or on the group page. So let me know if you have any trouble viewing that. And then I'm going to also go ahead and throw in my orange zest at this point. If you're using dried spices, hold off until we add our dried ingredients. But if you have zest or anything that's a little bit wetter, it will combine a little bit more easily at this point in the mix. So I'm just adding that in. All right, so I'm just going to give it a quick whisk just to kind of break up the egg yolks. If you are using a KitchenAid mixer, a stand mixer, and please feel free to do so. I figured I would tough it out and do this by hand with everyone who doesn't have access to one of those. But it's pretty much the same process. You just take your mixer bowl, you can add this stuff in. You don't even have to whisk it. The dough hook will do a pretty good job of breaking this stuff up, but feel free to just make it nice and even. And then you will be using a dough hook to complete the rest of the mix, just so you know. All right, so I've got my liquids all mixed together. Oh, and then I have a little bit of vanilla bean paste here. You can find it in some specialty food stores. You can definitely order it online. You might be able to find it at like Whole Foods or something. I actually got this in the UK. But you can also use a fresh vanilla bean that you scrape. You can add a little bit of extract. I'm just kind of going to do a dash like that. I like the speckles. It's not going to infuse a whole lot of flavor, but it will infuse like a nice kind of vanilla essence, I suppose. But I'm a fan of speckles in my dough, so those little vanilla seeds will look nice. All right, so now I'm going to set this aside. In this bowl I have my flour. I'm going to add in my sugar, my salt, and my instant yeast. If all you have is active dry yeast, it is a little bit different. So first of all, you're going to want to use a little bit more of the active dry. It's about 15% more is what you're going to need. And that's because active dry yeast is pretty much the same thing, except it has a bunch of dead yeast cells surrounding the live ones, which is why it also tells you to usually kind of dissolve it in some warm liquid. So, it would generally have you have heated up the water first to maybe around 90 or 100 degrees, and then let the yeast just sit on top of that for 10 minutes, and it would get kind of foamy. And that's just to activate the yeast. If you can get instant yeast, and you can get it from me, I would really recommend it. It's a lot easier to work with. It's more bang for your buck because you're not dealing with a bunch of dead yeast cells. I don't really know why active dry yeast is still a thing, but it is. So if that's all you have, just make those adjustments. And if you've already added it in, you didn't make those adjustments, don't panic. Your loaf will come out fine. So I'm going to dump my yeast right on top into my dry ingredients. And I'm just kind of going to mix this by hand, get this all mixed in together. You don't need to sift it. Generally with cakes and stuff, you want to sift, but when we're making a dough that we're going to be kneading and really developing a lot of gluten, it's not necessary at all. And then I'm going to add my dry ingredients right over top. I don't know what's up with my secondary camera here, but it doesn't seem to be wanting to work. So I'm just going to go ahead and angle my laptop down so you can see what I'm doing. Again, I'm about the least tech-savvy person in the world trying to do something that requires a fair amount of technical knowledge, so please bear with me. As I go along, I will try and get it ironed out, I promise. But in the meantime, this is what you're stuck with. So I'm just going through and getting all of the flour hydrated. It feels like a pretty dense dough, and it feels a little bit dry, but resist the urge to add more water at this point. As you keep kneading it, it will come together and smooth out for you. And I'm just going to keep it in the bowl basically until I've incorporated all of this stuff. Kind of scrape along the edges, get it all mixed in. Okay. Here we go. So at this point, you can turn it out onto your counter. If you have a big butcher block or something, that's really nice for kneading dough. It doesn't stick too much. But I'm just going to use my basic countertop and that'll be fine. So I'm just going to turn this out here, scrape out all my extra stuff so we can get that incorporated. And then you should be able to just kind of rub off this extra dough from your hands. Don't worry about rinsing them or anything at this point. Hopefully everyone did a good job washing their hands before we started. I know I did, and sanitized my counter. Made sure to use all of those good food safety practices, especially in the time of Corona. And we're just going to start kneading. So this is kind of what I'm doing is I'm pressing it out, and then I'm pulling that back into the center. I'm pressing it, and I'm doing about a quarter turn. And so what this is doing is creating those gluten bonds that we want in here. For those of you who don't know, because I think that there's a lot of ruthless misinformation out there about gluten, gluten is actually protein, and it's two types of protein. There's glutenin and gliadin, and they exist separately in dry flour. And when you add moisture to them, they bond to each other. They kind of twist up, and that's what gives bread dough its structure, which is why it's really hard to have a nice open crumb gluten-free dough, because that's what you need to trap all of those gases that would create those nice big bubbles and that chewy texture. But you can pretty easily have gluten-free cakes and cookies because you don't develop gluten in those doughs anyways. You want them to be really short and tender, not chewy like bread dough. So that's my little lesson on gluten. I'm a big advocate of it. If you don't have sensitivity to it, and I know a lot of people do, but if you're lucky enough not to, don't believe the demonization of it. It's not bad for you, and it lends to a lot of really beautiful baked goods. So you can see how the dough is really starting to come together. It's still pretty shaggy, so it hasn't smoothed out yet, but it feels nice and tacky. I haven't added any flour at all to my counter, but it's not sticking too much. And we don't want to add flour in if we don't have to, because we don't want it to get overly dry. We want a nice, spongy, moist dough when we bake our challah tomorrow. So if you're doing this by hand, you are going to have to knead it for, maybe 10 minutes. It will take a while to develop those gluten bonds, and because we have oil and egg in there, that's fat. And fat basically shortens those gluten strands, which is why when you hear something like short dough, that means it's really tender and it has a high fat content. It gets in there and keeps those bonds from forming. So we're going to have to work a little harder to get those bonded and form our dough here. So this is what's called an enriched dough, which generally means that it has some fat in it and also maybe some sugar. Lean doughs would be like a baguette dough or a traditional sourdough. Even your kind of Wonder Bread, white bread is more of an enriched dough. That usually is going to have like some milk in it or something like that. Challah traditionally does not have milk or butter or any dairy in it. It's a Jewish loaf, and you are not supposed to eat eggs or any animal byproducts with dairy. I'm going to butcher this, and please forgive me. This is very layperson's explanation of ancient Jewish culture. But you are not supposed to cook the baby in its mother's milk. which is to say you can't have dairy and animal byproduct or animal product in the same meal even. So pepperoni pizza, even if it was just beef pepperoni, not allowed. And so we wouldn't have any dairy in this, although if you look online, a lot of challah recipes do incorporate milk or milk powder or butter, and that's fine. Those will make some really beautiful doughs. Just know that that would not be a kosher version, and don't try to serve it to your friend who is a practicing Jew. They might be upset. So we're going to just keep working this. It is starting to smooth out a little bit. If you can see, it's a lot less shaggy. This is a great way to get a little bit of indoor exercise in. I know that that has been one of my struggles in this COVID era. It's pretty tricky to get up and move around a small apartment, but this is a great upper body workout. Engage your core as you're working that dough. And then the weather's so beautiful while it's in its bulk fermentation, you can get out there and go on a walk. That would be really great. This weather has been so stunning, it's definitely making me feel a lot better. All right, we're getting pretty close here. We're almost done with everything that we're going to do with this dough today. So just to walk you through the process of bread baking in general, you would typically, you mix your dough and then you develop it. And from there, hush Siri. From there, it goes into a bulk fermentation. And this is where you're going to take the entirety of the dough and let it ferment all as one unit. It will, a lot of recipes for home bakers will tell you to look for it to double in size. For more artisan style breads, you wouldn't mix it this much. So you would be putting what are called folds on it during this time, where you kind of stretch the dough out and fold it over itself instead of kneading it like we're doing right now. And it's all about, yes, fermentation and also developing the dough. The gluten strands will relax in this process. Your dough will strengthen. It's going to develop some of that good acidity. And we are going to take this dough and allow it to have its bulk fermentation for about an hour at room temperature. And then we're going to throw it in the fridge overnight and do what's called retarding it. And that's going to slow that fermentation process down, allow it to develop some really good acidity and, those nice preserving properties, that really good flavor. It's going to, again, strengthen our dough and make it a lot easier to work with tomorrow. So we're just about there. This is a little bit drier. So before it relaxes, we might have trouble doing what's called the Windowpane Test, where you check to see that you've developed all of that good gluten and you'll get a nice tight crumb. But if we let it relax for even 10 minutes, I bet we can pretty much get there at this point. Starting to smooth out a lot. Feels pretty tight. So I'm just going to take it and shape it into a ball. Whenever you're making your bread doughs at home, at the point that it's going into a bulk fermentation, you always want to try and keep it in kind of a ball shape. And the reason for this is that it's going to help the dough trap all of those gases that are being released in the fermentation process. And it will continue to help the dough strengthen, help that gluten develop and relax, and keep all of that gas in there. So, which we definitely will want as we're going along. So you can see it's pretty smooth. It's not like super duper smooth, but this is going to be great for our purposes. I'm going to take it and place it into an oiled bowl. I've just got some canola oil in here. I'm going to kind of roll it around, get it coated. And then I'm going to let this set at room temperature for about an hour. And we'll cover it also. We don't want our dough to dry out, so I'm going to cover it with plastic wrap. And then after an hour, we will punch it down and get some of that gas out. Make sure that it's in a nice ball shape again, and stick it in the fridge overnight. So you can see we've only been here for half an hour and have already successfully made a bread dough. So, you know, it's something that I think anyone can do. It's intimidating if you don't really know what's going on in the dough or what to look for, but it just takes practice and getting familiar with what it should feel like, what it should look like. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's just bread. So if it doesn't come out the way you wanted, if it comes out kind of funky or stiff or too dry or whatever, like, please feel free to reach out to me and ask me, you know, let me know what happened, and maybe we can troubleshoot it and figure out how to make it better the next time. But at the end of the day, like, you're not investing a lot of money into making your own bread. These ingredients are all pretty affordable. And again, if you have trouble finding any of these ingredients, please reach out to me. I still have plenty of stuff to make more baking kits available. And then, you know, you can get this stuff mixed and then just put it in the fridge until tomorrow, and you'll see that the steps for getting it all thrown together tomorrow are really not hard either. So I think that I love seeing everybody getting excited about baking on the internet. It's been really great to see people engaged with this and using that time to kind of learn a new skill. And I'm here and available if you have questions, if you have something that you specifically want to learn how to do, please let me know. It's going to be rocky for sure, guys. I am not tech savvy at all. I don't have firm plans. This is not scripted, but I can make these guarantees to you. Number one, I will always be wearing a goofy apron. I have many of them. I'm excited to share them with you. Number two, I will always be wearing slippers down here because I like to be comfortable, and that's what baking at home is all about. Number three, I will do my best to avoid profanity. I cannot make promises, but I know that many of you are at home with kids. Maybe you want to do some baking with your children. So I'll try my darndest to keep it to a minimum. And then, yeah, that's pretty much all I can guarantee you. It won't be professional. It won't be clean. But hopefully it'll be fun, and hopefully everything else will come together for you. So I'm going to go ahead, set your timers for an hour. We'll just press the dough down to punch it down, make sure it's in a nice ball shape, and cover it, put it in the fridge overnight. We'll be back here tomorrow at, I think I said 1 p.m. again to do the shaping. I will try and sort out some of my technical difficulty stuff and get everything smoothed out for this next iteration, but we'll be doing the shaping, the bake, and coconut macaroons tomorrow. So thanks for joining in, and feel free to share with anyone that you think might be interested in this. And then post pictures as you make your own products, please. Share your thoughts, share your questions, share your photos, and yeah, let's all stay home, stay healthy, and stick together. All right. Bye, everyone.